in complexity theory topics in linear programming. His research in the field of interest concern has influenced the researcher and organized in highly standard journals and conferences. The participants will definitely have been benefited from his session, particularly in quantum algorithms. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Good morning to all of you. Let me first share my screen and then I can start my presentation. I just wanted to confirm once again that you can clearly hear my voice and you can see my screen.
Yes, you are audible clearly and the screen is visible too.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for taking your time to attend this talk. I hope to tell you something about more precisely, as mentioned in the beginning, quantum algorithms. Uh, the idea is that I will first present the basics which are needed to create a quantum algorithm, or in other words, we want to answer this question: what do we mean by a quantum algorithm? All of you know what an algorithm is. You have this input output processing tasks on a classical computer. When we do the same thing on a quantum computer, things are slightly different, and that's what we want to understand. Once we have a basic understanding of what a quantum algorithm is, I will want to show you a small example where quantum does much better than a classical computer. That's called Deutsch's algorithm. So that's the plan. Learn the basics of quantum algorithm and then see one example where quantum does better than classical. From my side, I am not in a hurry. I have no plans to complete everything. So please feel free to stop and ask questions. It is better to, I would assume that if we just do 50% of the material, but if everything is clear, that's much better than covering 100% and things being not clear. So please feel free to stop me in between, whatever things are not clear, and keep asking me questions. Great, let us start. And let me start with a question, right? On the left, you have this classical computer, you have programmed on it, you have worked on it, browsed on it, and you're very familiar with it. And suddenly on the right, you receive this gift which says quantum computer on it. Probably it's made by D-Wave or Google or IBM, but you receive this as your box, and it promises to be the quantum computer, right? Which can solve all the problems. First thing, and probably slightly in detail, I want to ask this question: what do you think? Which one is better, the one on the left or the one on the right? What is your opinion? Anyone? I can't see the chat box. So
Yes, sir. From my side, it is the left one.
okay. So why do you think so?
Because right now, because whatever we are doing,
Uh-huh.
that means all the competition problem. That means we are familiar with this the left one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because we don't know the new paradigm of quantum computing, so we cannot mapping all the problems with the quantum computing. So right side is not familiar for me, so I feel like that the left one is better than me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Interesting. Thanks. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So I think a very good point was made that since we are familiar with classical computer, we can probably do more things on it as compared to a quantum computer. And what I want to emphasize is that even when we get familiar with quantum computer, people who are researching on quantum computer, none of them will say that a quantum computer is better than a classical computer. what we have to realize is that there are certain problems where quantum computer can do better than classical computer. That does not mean that in all aspects quantum computer is better than classical computer. Actually, for most of your problems, classical computer will be good enough. You don't need the hassle of a quantum computer. But then there are specific problems like factorization, like search, like solving linear equations, optimization problems, where it seems that quantum computer gives a considerable advantage. Being students of quantum algorithms, we want to figure out what are the kind of problems where quantum algorithms do better than classical algorithms. But definitely it is not the case that, once the quantum computer comes to the picture, we should throw off our classical computer. For most of the problems, still classical computer will be good. So we will start with this understanding that in some areas, for certain kind of problems, quantum computers can be better than a classical computer. And that's what we want to understand. And hopefully, if time permits, I will show you one such problem where quantum computer does better than a classical computer. Okay. So this is something which, now quantum computer is becoming very popular, and you might have also heard about it in the news, and probably this is the reason all of you are here in this FDP, right? That it seems that quantum computers are much more powerful than a classical computer. They can solve many problems, and it seems now that a lot of companies are very, very close to building a quantum computer. We already said that there are certain cases when quantum computer can be more powerful. And since all this is the case, all of us want to learn about quantum computers. That's why all of you are here. And when you hear the name of quantum computers, you think, oh, I should learn about quantum mechanics. And I don't know about you, but being from a computer science background, it scares me that I have to, learn a lot of physics once again, because I learned physics in my high school, right? And it is very far behind. So that makes us slightly sad. But the good thing is, you don't have to. You don't have to learn entire quantum mechanics. We will start by learning what we call postulates of quantum mechanics. And I assume that most of you will be familiar with the kind of matrices and vectors which are required to understand the postulates. Those postulates will tell us basic things about a quantum computer. What will be the input? How do you operate on different states in a quantum computer? How do you get the output? So on and so forth. Once we understand that, we are in the domain of computer science and mathematics. We can almost forget about quantum mechanics. So this postulates are something which are needed to understand the working of a quantum computer. They are kind of a crash course in quantum mechanics that is required for us. Are you familiar with postulates of quantum mechanics? Do you know what they do? Any idea about postulates of quantum mechanics? Okay, so let's talk about what are postulates. The name might sound fancy, but the idea behind postulates is very, very simple. We want to understand these questions about a quantum computer. How do I store data or information on a quantum computer? What does it mean that, I have some data on a quantum computer? Is it like 1, 2, 3, like we store on a classical computer, or something else? Once we have the data, what can we do with it? On a classical computer, you can do a lot of things with data, and that's why we have, all these big companies charging us a lot of money, because they can do a lot of things with data. But in general, in a very simple way, think of it as classical computers in 1940s. You have some states, quantum states. What kind of operations can you do? And then something which is not very important in a classical computer, how do we get the final result? How do we get the output from this, all this computation from our quantum computer? This is straightforward. In a classical computer, the output is, just seen. But that seeing is different in a quantum computer, and we actually need a theorem, a postulate for it. And I will talk about it. And another simple question for classical computer is, what happens if there are multiple systems? If you have two systems of one. So let me ask this question, right? How do you store data and information? What is the smallest unit of information on a classical computer? What do we call it? I can't see the chat box. So if you're answering on the chat box, I don't know, just unmute yourself and try. How do we store information on a classical computer? What is the smallest unit?
Yes, sir. Bit, sir. Bit.
Right? Good. So now we have these. If we want to say data, the data is basically a string of bits, right? 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, and so on and so forth. Now, going from 1 bit to 2 bits was very easy on a classical computer, right? Because you had 0. If you have 2 bits, 1 is in state 0 and 1 is in state 1, you will just say 0, 1, the combined state. This turns out to be not enough in a quantum computer, and we will see that it is slightly different. And that's in some sense the reason of the power of the quantum computer. So let's see. Let's answer all these questions for a quantum computer, right? For classical computers, how do we store data information? As bits. How do we operate on them? We have these AND gates, OR gates, NOT gates. Once you took the first course, you might have constructed these small circuits where you had AND or NOT gates and you found the output. So we are going to the very, very basics, 1950 questions for classical computers.
Sir, I have one question, sir.
Sure.
Sir, you are talking about this particular 4 points. That means these particular 4 points, how exactly it is related to the quantum mechanics? Actually, postulates.
That is postulates, yes. So postulates will answer these questions for quantum computer. Think of it this way. They general postulates of quantum mechanics talk about a quantum system, but for us, it will tell us how to answer these 4 questions for a quantum computer.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Right. And then the last 2 questions are not really that important for a classical computer, but we will see. We have to be clear in this regard for a quantum computer. So think of these questions as, what is the input? What can you do with that? What is the output? And how do you keep multiple systems? This is what we want to understand. Let us start with the first simple question. How do we store information? And you might have heard of this term qubit by now. You had already had 1 day of quantum computing. So generally, classically, we have a bit. Quantumly, we call it a qubit, quantum bit. And the difference is that the state is now a vector. A vector which consists of 2 complex numbers. And since you already had a day of quantum computing, what are these 2 complex numbers called? So a state of a quantum bit is generally written as alpha beta, where alpha and beta are complex numbers such that alpha square plus beta square equal to 1. I'm asking, what are these alpha and beta called? You might have seen it written this way also. So these are called amplitudes. So you can be in 0 state, you can be in 1 state, or you can be in a combination of these two states, 0 and 1. This is what is allowed for a quantum bit. Classically, you can either be in 0 state or a 1 state. Quantumly, you can be in 0 state or 1 state or in a combination. This combination is called when it is not in state 0, not in state 1, but in a mixture of that is called a
Superposition.
superposition. Thank you. So you can be in a superposition of states. It's not like we are in 0 with state alpha square and 1 with state beta square. That's a common confusion. I will talk about it. Remember that these alpha beta are not probabilities. These are amplitudes. This will tell us the probability, but they will tell us much more. They are not simply probabilities. That's what I wanted to emphasize. Okay, right. So this is going to be our fundamental unit where information is stored. Alpha 0 plus beta 1. And this is the vector space. If you're not familiar with this notation, don't worry about it. It is saying that a qubit is represented by two complex numbers. Alpha, two complex numbers, alpha and beta. So the state of the two qubit is always in a superposition, where if alpha was 1, that means we are in state 0. If beta was 1, then we were in state 1. If both of them are non-zero, then we say that we are in a superposition of states 0 and 1. Few examples of superposition. This is we can have a state where our amplitude is 1 by root 2 for 0, 1 by root 2 for 1. And I think you might have seen this. Someone might have said that this means we are in state 0 with probability half and 1 with probability half. Similarly, even here, we are in state 0 with probability half, with 1 with probability half. And this is where I want to emphasize the difference. Even though both states, if we measure, then we will be in state 0 with probability half and 1 with probability half. That is true. But these two states are not the same. We can operate on them differently and get a different output. So what I mean to say is that this plus state is not simply something where we are in state 0 with probability half and 1 with probability half. It is much more than that. And that information is only given when you give the complete amplitudes. Not just saying that, oh, we are in state 0, we are in state 0 with probability half and 1 with probability half. That would be a randomized computer, and that would not be any advantage for a quantum computer. If it was just like that, if you are just using probabilities, you are saying, oh, in some probability we are in this state, some probability we are in this state, that would not be much more powerful. That would be like a classical computer. That's not the reason why quantum computers are powerful. The reason is that they have amplitudes which can cancel each other, and that we will see. So just to make this point once more, when we talk about alpha 0 plus beta 1, people say we are in 0 with probability alpha square, 1 with probability beta square. That is a consequence of what we call a measurement, and we will see that. That will be how we take the output. But what I'm going to say is that if your state is this, then the right hand side is just a consequence. That's not the whole story. The whole story is understood only when you describe alpha and beta. So the equivalence is not true. Never understand the state psi as we are in state 0 with probability alpha square, 1 with probability beta square. That's a wrong simplification to make. The right hand side is a consequence. And to get rid of this mistake, remember that these two states are completely different. This is generally called a plus state. This is called a minus state. And plus and minus states are very different, and we will see that they are different in this talk. We don't want to say that, oh, both of them are the same states. We are in state 0 with probability half, 1 with probability half. Are there any questions about this confusion? Okay, good. So then if you want to capture it mathematically, this is the general postulate which comes from quantum mechanics, and for us it is enough to understand the state of a qubit. But if you want to see it in a general system, it is described by the state is described by a Hilbert space. For qubit it was c square. For general discrete system it will be c to the power n. That means n complex numbers will be needed. And if you have a continuous space and everything, then it is Hilbert space, but we won't be using it. For us, it is enough that a qubit is a system with two complex numbers. Okay, and it will obviously be a unit vector, right? Alpha square plus beta square equal to 1. The amplitudes sum up to, the amplitude squares sum up to 1. This is what our first postulate says. So now we know how we will store data on our quantum computer. A very related question is what happens if we have two qubits, right? So one qubit was in a state alpha 0 plus beta 1. Let's say second state is in alpha prime 0 plus beta prime 1. What will be the combined state? And generally, in classically, we will say, oh, we will put just like a comma between the two, and we will say, oh, first state is in this first system is in this state, second qubit is in this state, and that is the complete description. It turns out that's not good enough for a quantum computer. So now we know how to describe the state of one qubit. Let's see how to describe the states of two qubits. And this is done by looking at all possible classical states, right? So remember, for one qubit, what were the classical states? 0 and 1. So what will be the possible classical states for two qubits? 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. These are four possible classical states. What quantum mechanics tells us, again, we don't need a proof for it. This is a postulate. This is something which is given to us by quantum mechanics. The state of two qubits is a superposition over all possible classical states. So it will require four complex numbers. So this we denote by c to the power 4, such that the amplitude squares sum up to 1. So it is a unit vector. This tells us what is the state of two qubits. Similarly, if I had three qubits, how many possible classical states will be there?
8,
8, right? And then there will be 8 complex numbers. So 3 qubits will be described by c to the power. And mathematically, this is represented by what we call a tensor product. And I would encourage you to go and read about tensor products. But for us, at this point, it is enough to just consider that you take all possible classical states and take superposition. That is good enough as a definition for tensor product for now. If you want to read the mathematical framework, please, I would encourage you to read it. So the fourth postulate, we already saw about first postulate. I'm talking about the fourth postulate. Fourth postulate says, if you have, the state of the first system and state of the second system, the combined thing is a tensor product. It is not just, H1 comma H2 or H1 direct sum H2. It is a tensor product. That's the mathematical definition. For us, remember, take all possible classical states of two qubits and take a superposition. So now, if we talk about n qubits, how many possible classical states would be there? If I have n bits, how many possible classical states can be there? Very good. 2 to the power n, right? And now for a quantum system, that will be the dimension. So if you have only n qubits, and if you want to write the state, you will need 2 to the power n numbers. And you might have heard of all these stories about how 2 to the power n is very big, right? 2 to the power 64 is more than the number of atoms in the universe or something like that, right? So even, and remember, on your classical computer, you have millions of bits. So even if you want to writing the state of 1,000 qubits, you can't write it on a piece of paper or on a classical computer, because the state will need 2 to the power 1,000 numbers. And I don't need to convince you as computer scientists that this is a very, very, very big number. And this is, in the sense, this is the reason why quantum computers are hard to simulate on a classical computer. You just can't write down the states, do the matrix multiplications and vectors, and know what will happen on a quantum computer. In a quantum computer, these to the power n states will be just represented by n qubits, just by 1,000 qubits, and then you can operate on it. Okay. So this is one reason why classical simulation is expensive, but I don't want you to generalize and say this is the reason why quantum computers are powerful. So if there was just superposition, quantum computers would not be as powerful as they are. The point is, we can use interference and destructive interference among these 2 to the power n numbers to create something, to get our computational answer. Without interference, superposition would not be held. And this is what we will see even in the example today. So yes, it is true that this 2 to the power n states makes the classical simulation expensive, but this is not the reason of quantum computers' power. It comes from multiple factors, and we will see those multiple factors. Great. And this thing is called this fact that, you know, you have these 2 to the power n numbers and you can write your state as a superposition of this. This leads to this very nice phenomena of entanglement. Is anyone aware of what entanglement is? Anyone would like to take a guess what entanglement is in a quantum computer? Okay. So intuitively, the definition of entanglement, or the way entanglement can be thought of, is if you have two systems on a classical computer, you can always say what is the state of the first system and what is the state of the second system. It turns out that's not true for a quantum computer. There can be states of 2 qubits where you have no idea what is the state of the first qubit. You can think about it. You cannot write this state. So this is, you know, this was one possible classical state. This was one possible classical state of 2 qubits. And then I'm taking a superposition over it. So this is a valid .
Sir, your mic is off. Register.
Sir, you are muted.
Sir, your voice is not coming. Probably your mic is off.
You are still muted, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
better.
Oh, I guess you muted everyone, so I also got muted. Okay, I got that now. Okay, now you can hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right. So then this is what we call entanglement. So the other way to say it is that the state of a composite system can't always be broken down into the states of individual system. You had two parties, Alice and Bob. They can have a combined system where you cannot ask this question, what does Alice have? It is not possible to describe the state of just Alice. The states of Alice and state of Bob are entangled. Okay, so these are superposition, entanglement. These are few things which makes quantum computers powerful. Okay, so what we are able to do is answer two questions. How do we store data information? Through this qubits. What happens if there are multiple systems? Consider all possible classical states and then take. Can you answer? You take all possible classical states and then take their. How do you describe multiple systems? You take all possible classical states and then take their. Take their superposition, right? That's the statement I was looking for. So now we have two postulates. Let's look at the other two questions. What can we do with this data? Now we can have 1 qubit, 2 qubit, 100 of qubits. What can you do with those 100 qubits? What kind of operations you can apply on that? And then we will see how to get the output from that. But operations, right? So what kind of operations can you apply on classical bits?
And or not.
Very nice, right? So all these gates, parity gate, majority gate, all these you can construct and or not. All this you can do on classical bits. Have you seen what kind of gates can you apply on a quantum computer? Was that considered yesterday?
Yes, sir. Hadamard gate, CNOT gate, Toffoli gate, something like
Okay.
that.
So what is different between Hadamard, CNOT, Toffoli, and or not gate? How are quantum gates different from classical gates?
Actually, I'm not sure about my answer, but yesterday class I have observed there is a one difference. All the classical operations are not reversible,
Very nice. Very nice.
and but quantum operations are reversible by nature.
Very good. Very nice. That's one very significant difference. All quantum gates are reversible. Though that's not enough in the sense that there are reversible classical computations. So whatever you can do on a classical computer, it is possible to make everything reversible. And this you can do by Toffoli gate. So there is a classical Toffoli gate. Using classical Toffoli gate, you can make reversible and reversible or reversible not, and then you can do everything reversible. So quantumly, everything has to be reversible, and not just that, it has to be very, very precise kind of operations. So let's see how more special they are. They are reversible, but much more than that. So let's talk about that. But remember, the states were vectors, right? That's what we saw. They were a qubit state was this vector c square alpha beta. Now you have seen real vectors, you have seen complex vectors. What are the things which operate on vectors? And if I want to be very precise, what are linear operations on vectors? So this is a mathematics question, nothing to do with computer science. What kind of things linearly operate on vectors? What are the linear operations on vectors? You are given a vector, you want to convert it into something else, such that, you know, m of v1 plus v2 is equal to m of v1 plus m of v2. What is this m? Hold this thought. I will be back in a minute. Yeah, sorry. I'm here again. So anyone can answer what are these m's? What are these called in mathematics?
Operator?
Very nice. Matrices, right? Matrices are the linear operations on vectors. So intuitively, we would want matrices to be our operations on a quantum computer. Though matrices are not enough, what we need are special matrices, which should take a state to a state. Remember, a state was a unit vector. So we want matrices which take unit vectors, let's say in C square, to unit vectors in C square. And these are called unitary matrices. There is a very nice mathematical way to define it. A matrix is called unitary if this equation is true. There are many different ways of saying it. It preserves the length. It's the linear operators which preserve the lengths. Most important lesson for us would be that everything, all operations are going to be unitary for us. And here you can actually see reversibility, right? Because can you see from this equation that u is reversible? Can anyone try to guess? Why is that? What is reversible? If you can apply u, then you can apply the opposite of u or inverse of u also. Now, given that this is your equation, you know this. Can you say what is opposite of u or what is the inverse of u? So the inverse of u is going to be u star, right? Because u times u inverse should be identity, and we know that u times u star is identity. By definition, there is an inverse of a unitary matrix. That means we always know how to get back our original state. If we apply u, we can reverse it by applying u star, because u star is the inverse operator. If you are familiar with mathematical constructs like this, it is okay. Otherwise, just remember the take-home message is that all operations have to be reversible and unitary for a quantum computer. This is the message from the second postulate, right? So a unitary operation describes this. The thing which we have to remember from this is that our gates are going to be unitary matrices. So actually, whatever you have seen before, Hadamard, Toffoli, C0, all of those, if you write them as matrices, they will be unitary matrices. Once we know that we are going to use unitary matrices, one of the very important thing is linearity. Okay. So how do you describe Hadamard gate, right? You said that you have seen Hadamard gate. How do you describe a Hadamard gate, right? Generally, if you want to describe an AND gate, you write the truth table, right? You have 4 possible states. So if you want to write what is the action of AND gates, you have 4 possible states, you write the output 0, 0, 0, and 1, right? And then this is the truth table. You have described the action of AND. Unfortunately, now you want to describe the action of a gate which takes some element of C square to C square, right? It takes two complex numbers alpha beta and give me two complex numbers alpha prime beta prime. The choice of alpha beta is infinite. So how do I write a truth table like that? My question is, how do you describe what gate, what is the meaning of, let's say, Hadamard gate, or what is the meaning of CNOT gate? So what is Hadamard gate? Let me say that. We have seen Hadamard gate yesterday. Can you write the truth table for Hadamard gate? Can you describe any quantum gate? So I would like you to answer something, right? Is it too easy what I'm talking about, or is it not clear? You have seen Hadamard and CNOT gate yesterday, right? Now what is Hadamard gate? Or you don't know how to say what is Hadamard gate? Anything is appreciated, right? So what is the Hadamard gate? Okay. So how I understand Hadamard gate, one way I can describe Hadamard gate is something which takes state 0 to plus state. You remember what was plus state? 1 by root 2 0 plus 1 by root 2 1. And 1 it takes to minus. One by root 2 0 minus 1 by root 2 1, right? So I can say what Hadamard gate is doing on two classical states. But is that enough? What if I apply Hadamard on alpha 0 plus beta 1? What will be my answer? Remember, Hadamard is a quantum gate, so I should be able to describe its action on any quantum state. So what happens if I apply Hadamard gate on a state alpha 0 plus beta 1? What will be my answer?
Superposition state.
Sorry?
Superposition state.
But what exactly? There will be superposition. That's great. Thanks. But what exactly? I want to write it as a state, right? I want to write it as alpha prime 0 plus beta prime 1. And what is alpha prime and what is beta prime? How do I figure that out? Okay, this is a very, very important concept which is overlooked. And please remember this, because anytime you want to work out what a gate is doing, you should know that all gates act linearly. Okay, this is why linearly is very, very important. So what happens? Linearly means the action of Hadamard on a combination of classical states is same as you take the same state. And what happened to the zero state? What does Hadamard do to the zero state? Zero state goes to which state for Hadamard?
Get plus.
Plus, right? So plus state plus beta minus. So you take the amplitude, then say where 0 is going. Then you take the amplitude of 1 and then where 1 is going. This is how you can apply your gates, quantum gates, on any superposition. That means if I tell you what your gate is doing on classical states, you know what they are going to do on the quantum states, because you just extend it by linear. This is what it means, extending by linear, right? And
Sorry
now
to
this
interrupt,
becomes,
sir.
yes,
The
yes, please
ultimate
go
gate
ahead with
will
the question.
only
Sorry.
will the ultimate gate only modify the 0 and 1 state? It won't affect alpha and beta.
No. See, it has changed alpha and beta, right? So if you look at alpha prime is now alpha by root 2 plus beta by root 2. Because the amplitude of 0 from plus state, alpha by root 2 amplitude will come. And from minus state, beta by root 2 amplitude will come. Right? So let me just write it clearly. My final state is alpha plus beta minus. This is not the same state as alpha 0 plus beta 1. It is alpha plus beta minus, which is okay. So now, if you look at this state and you collect the amplitude of 0, what is the amplitude of 0 now? Alpha by root 2 from here and beta by root 2 from here. That's why sorry, this was a minus, right? And what about the amplitude of 1? What is the amplitude of 1? It will be alpha by root 2 from the first plus state and minus beta by root 2 from the minus state. So you see that amplitude has completely changed. Your alpha amplitude was there on 0. Now it is alpha by root 2 plus beta by root 2. It was beta on one state and now it is alpha by root 2 minus beta by root 2. Does this answer the question? If there is confusion, I can explain this more.
So this alpha prime and beta prime are basically the alpha by root 2 plus beta by root 2, and beta prime is in fact alpha by root 2 minus beta by root 2.
Correct, exactly.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Right. So our once I apply Hadamard, I get new amplitudes. The state has completely changed now. And I have described to you exactly how it has changed, right? I have described it for Hadamard gate, but you can do it for any gate. Once you know how a classical gate, a quantum gate acts on classical states, then you know how it acts on the superposition. You just, extend it by linearity. You alpha times what it does on 0 plus beta times what it does on 1. And that will tell you what will be the final quantum state. And this I will not go into detail because you might have seen. Important gate is this. This is the NOT gate. This is the NOT gate classically also. But quantumly also we have a NOT gate which looks the same. So this takes 0 to 1 and 1 to 0, right? So now if I have a state alpha 0 plus beta 1, what will happen under this NOT gate? What will be my final state? Again, alpha will come like this. And what does NOT gate do on 0?
Alpha 1 plus beta 0.
Right? And similarly, you can talk about Hadamard matrix. It's a special matrix. You have seen it, so I won't go into the detail. You can write it as a, so these are two ways in which you can write action of a gate. You can describe what it does on the classical states, or you can write it as a matrix. C0, there are multiple gates like this. So let me ask this question, right? What is the output of C0 gate on this state? 1 by root 2. Do you remember what C0 gate is? Yes or no?
No, sir.
No, no problem. So what C0 gate does is it has two parts. First one is called the control bit, and second is called the target bit. Notice again that I will describe action only on the classical states, and that is good enough. If the control is 0, then I will not do anything with the target bit. Okay? If control is 0, don't do anything. And C0 gate says if the control bit is 1, then you apply NOT gate on the target bit. So I've described this action classically, and that is good enough to describe it on any quantum state. So is the action clear on the classical states?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now, if the state is 1 by root 2 0 0 plus 1 1, I apply C0 to it. What will be my final state? So again, the amplitude of 0 0 was 1 by root 2. And what will C0 gate do to 0 0? This is the control bit, and this is the target bit. So what will C0 do on 0 0?
Nothing. 0 0.
It will do nothing.
And on 1 1?
1 0.
Great. Right? So this is how now you can understand the action of any quantum gate. We are done with three things now. The only thing left is how to get the output. We know what is the state. It's a superposition state. If we have more than one qubit, then we look at all classical states and then take their superposition. This gives rise to entanglement. That was the fourth postulate. Second postulate was that your gates are unitary.
So can you show the output of C0 again for a second? I just need to confirm. Yeah. Thank you.
Makes sense, right?
Right.
Please feel free to ask questions if something is not clear. And this finally, the only thing left is output, and that is called measurements. And you kind of know what measurement is. The only thing which we will need is that, you know, when you have this kind of a quantum state, and if you measure it in the standard basis, you will get alpha square with, you will get 0 with probability alpha square, 1 with probability beta square. In general, if your state is in a combination of n classical states, and you measure in the standard basis, this we can, I will not go into the detail of what standard, how to measure in different bases. For us, it is enough to measure in a standard way. In measuring in the standard way, I will get answer I with probability alpha square. This is how measurement is done for qubits. Simple qubits in a quantum computer. If you want to notice the mathematical definition of it, it's basically says that, you know, a measurement is a collection of subspaces, and when you measure it, you get your state gets projected onto the corresponding subspace. But again, if you are not familiar with this notions of mathematics, let's not worry about it. We will remember this is what measurement is for us. This is how you can get an output. Notice that when I measure, I do not get numbers alpha and beta. If someone gives you a qubit and says, oh, this is a qubit in some state alpha 0 plus beta 1, tell me what is alpha and beta. It's not direct. You can't tell what is alpha, what is beta. You can only measure, you will obtain this statistics. And you have to do this statistics multiple times. You have to do this measurement multiple times to guess the value of alpha and beta. In other words, if you had just one qubit, which was in state alpha 0 plus beta 1, you cannot figure out what is alpha and what is beta. Does that make sense? This is the only way to gain information out of qubits.
Sir, my question is that after measuring, that means whatever the measurement actually we are using get the result. So after measuring that, how we can understand it is coming only two state in the form of two state 0 and 1.
Correct.
So that means okay. Yes.
So that is why it is not simple, right? So then I will show you an example where you can interfere probability so that your amplitude will come to the correct state.
Okay, sir. Okay,
this
sir.
will not make sense now, but when I show you example, I think this will become clearer.
Okay, sir.
Okay, but just want to emphasize that when your state is alpha 0 plus beta 1 does not mean we have alpha as well as beta, right?
Okay, sir. Okay.
So great. Again, this is a mathematical description of projective measurements. I will skip this. Now we have all the four postulates. We have all the quantum mechanics required to understand quantum algorithm, right? So how do we store data information? You can answer now. On classical computers we knew. Now on quantum computer, how do we store data information? Using what is the quantum equivalent of bits?
Qubit.
Qubits. Great. What operations are permitted over this data? What kind of gates can we apply?
Hadamard CNOT.
But what was the property, mathematical property of that? All of them were
Linear.
unitary.
Unitary, sorry.
Unitary operators. How do we obtain final results of the computation? By doing
Measurement.
And what happens if there are multiple systems? We take all possible classical states and then superpose.
Superposition.
So now you know enough from quantum mechanics so that we can start building quantum algorithms. I will take a break of 5 minutes now, or I will hope that this will be a 5-minute break for you, and then we will see an example of a quantum algorithm. So in that 5 minutes, I am here. If anyone has a question, please ask. I will start again the lecture after 5 minutes. And Jayanta, if you are there, I just wanted to ask, is it okay if I take 5 or 10 more minutes than 11:30? If I go up to 11:35, 11:40?
Yeah, sure. No problem, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks. So yeah, so I am here if you have any questions till now about the 4 postulates. I would be happy to answer them.
Good morning, sir.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, I
Hello.
can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hello, sir.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Yes, Bapaditya sir, you are audible. You may
Hello.
proceed with your queries.
Sir, can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Hello. Sir, I have a question. May I ask? Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, please ask the question to the expert, please.
Yeah. Someone else wanted to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Sir, actually,
Yes.
we'll store the classical bits in binary format in the flip-flops in hardware. So likewise, how to store this qubits, sir?
It's a nice question, but ma'am, okay. First thing is, I would like to give a disclaimer. I'm a computer scientist, and that's not our expertise in the sense that, this is something we assume. All the four postulates that there will be a quantum system which will show these properties, that we will assume and we work on that. But as much as I have interacted from physicists, there are multiple ways in which we can try to store a qubit. One way is to store them as superconducting qubits. So you have superconducting systems, very small configurations of electrons and everything. Those can store a qubit. Or you can also do it using the state of a photon. Actually, any small system where you have two different distinct possibilities, then you can use those two distinct possibilities to encode a qubit. So for photon, it's polarization. You can have vertical polarization or a horizontal polarization. Mathematically, we say that these states are orthogonal. So you can say vertical polarization is 0, horizontal polarization is 1, and then you can have superposition. Or you can say you have electron where, the spin up and spin down. If you remember the 11th, 12th course in quantum mechanics, spin up you can say 1 and spin down you can say 0. So any small system where you have these two distinct orthogonal two possible states, they can be used to store a qubit.
Thank you, sir.
And people are trying multiple ways.
Okay.
Sir, I have a question.
Sure. Go ahead.
Sir, I want to ask you that in case of measurement, suppose I have two qubits, alpha 0 plus beta 1. It is my first qubit, and another qubit is that alpha dash 0 plus beta dash 1.
Sure.
So these two different qubits. So if we measure these two qubits, then I'll get, suppose my result is 0 in both the cases. Then
Yes.
how will I differentiate that it is actually from two different qubits I'm getting the 0 as the result?
How will you differentiate that you are
In both the case I'm getting 0 after measurement.
yes.
So how will I understand that it is actually from two different qubits I'm getting the
So yes, so
0 as
exactly,
the.
this is a problem, right? If we are only given one copy of these two different states, right?
Yeah.
So if alpha 0 plus beta 1, you have one qubit, alpha prime 0 plus beta prime 1, you have another qubit,
Yeah.
and you have just one qubit each. It's not possible to differentiate between them completely.
Okay.
Okay, if you have given multiple qubits, you will do multiple measurements, and then you can see whether the statistics, seems like alpha square beta square or alpha prime square beta prime square.
Okay.
Okay, And if you know the values of alpha, beta, and alpha prime, beta prime, then you can do non-standard measurements, which I haven't talked about.
Okay, sir.
And they can give you a hint about where you are. But in general, for two quantum states, it's not possible to distinguish them just with one copy each.
Okay, sir.
Right? And this is a big, like, that is why people think that, oh, I have state alpha 0 plus beta 1. That means I know alpha, I know beta. That's not correct. That's not the case. We have to intelligently get the output. That's why understanding measurements is important.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sir, how actually probability is associated with measurement?
So this is again, this comes from quantum mechanics postulate, right? And the association is if your state is if you are measuring in some subspace, the probability is the length of the projection on that subspace.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay. In a simple way, in the when your state is alpha 0 plus beta 1 and you are projecting on state 0, then your probability will be alpha square.
Okay, sir. Okay,
if you
sir.
are projecting on state 1, your probability will be beta square.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
But yeah. If there are, I saw many questions in chat box, please just unmute yourself and ask questions, or let me see. Okay, so someone has asked, is quantum computers available in the market? Is it commercialized as other systems? Definitely they are not commercialized. Now, available in the market, it depends upon who you are. If you are US government, Indian government, Chinese government, yes, they are available in the market. But if you are talking about, can we buy a quantum computer? No, they are very, very expensive. And when I say quantum computers, they are not complete quantum computers with all powers of quantum computers. They are these quantum computers which have small number of qubits, some entanglement is there, some entanglement is not there. So these are actually called NISQ device, noisy intermediate scaled quantum computers. So they're not full version of quantum computers. But yeah, such restricted quantum computers have been made by Google, Microsoft and everything, Google, IBM and all, and yes, you can buy them if you have enough money. Yes, so question was what storage devices and what capacity is used in quantum computers? Again, to that detail, I'm not a physicist. A correct person would be a physicist or an electrical engineer who works in the hardware of quantum computers. So this, I'm a person who works in algorithms, who tries to build algorithms on it. So you are asking an algorithm person to answer, you know, what are transistors made of? What is the capacity of your transistors? And frankly, we have no idea. I told you just few examples of how you store qubits, and that's what I understand. There are simulation tools for quantum computers. Yes, you can try the free ones. IBM has something called Qiskit, Qiskit, and you can start building small quantum circuits. There are nice tutorials also. If you want, just go to the Qiskit website, download the software and start building quantum computers. They have a very nice classical simulation tool which will tell you what will happen to your quantum circuit. But obviously it can do it for a small number of qubits. As the number of qubits become large, it's very expensive to have a classical simulation tool. And there is another question, how do we start learning quantum computer from basic? My suggestion is get your linear algebra basics strong and then pick a good book. A good book would be Nielsen and Chuang. I can probably write it here. This is standard quantum computing reference book. They have a chapter on linear algebra, but I would say that brush it up anyway. If you are familiar with matrices and vectors, it will make your life much easier. There is book by, so Nielsen and Chuang I have already mentioned. Another book is Mosca, Laflamme, and one more author I'm forgetting. But yeah, I would strongly suggest Nielsen and Chuang. Otherwise, you can also use this Moscail log book. That's also decent. But it will require probability, linear algebra, having good basics there. And these books are excellent for learning quantum computing, quantum algorithms. Okay, if there are no more questions, should we, sorry, go ahead.
Sir, can you tell me some particular thing, something like that? If talking about the, actually I want to know more about the quantum type of function, that means quantum circuit. So there is any benchmark resources of quantum circuit so that I can get some ready-made quantum circuit? There is available any quantum benchmark circuit, this type of.
So Qiskit is a tool, right? And where you can build your own quantum circuits, and you can see a lot of quantum circuits have already been implemented.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
And there is such a system by Amazon also. I'm not sure if it is free. Qiskit is
okay, sir.
free.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
You can build your quantum systems. They have libraries from which you can get quantum circuits and things like that.
Okay, sir.
So if there are no more questions, sorry. I can't hear your question.
Good morning, sir. Sorry to sir. Is there any simulation? I think I have seen the chat box. Question was there, but I want to know the simulation tool about for the quantum computing.
Yeah. So let me just write it in the chat box. You can search on Google. This is IBM Qiskit, and you can download that, and there are nice tutorials also. You can learn from those tutorials. They have, so
thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
When you make a quantum system, the answer is done by their classical simulation tool.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. So should we move on to the second part now, if there are no more questions?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So before I move on to the second part, let me ask you a question. What kind of quantum problems, what kind of classical problems do we solve on a classical computer, right? When you teach programming to students, when you teach data structures and algorithms to students, what kind of problems do you solve on a classical computer? What are the few basic algorithms which you talk about?
Suppose, sir, like those problems we can use like divide and conquer type of technique we are using, greedy method we are using, dynamic programming we are using. Right. So that type of method we can use. Yeah.
These are the techniques which you use, but what are the problems? The problems are like searching, right?
Searching, yes, sir.
Sorting,
yes, sir.
Factorization.
Yes, sir.
These are all problems which we study, right?
Yes, sir.
On a classical computer. And our goal ultimately is to design quantum algorithms. Quantum circuit is basically, a collection of quantum gates. You already know what quantum gates are. If you write them one by one, first I apply this gate, then this gate, that gate, that's a quantum circuit. So our ultimate aim for quantum algorithms is to design a quantum circuit for problems which we generally study in a classical literature also, and even other problems, but it helps to have solutions of usual classical problems. Let me tell you, we have problems, classical problems like search and factoring, which are completely classical and have much faster quantum solution. But to understand that quantum solution, we need much more background. Instead, what I'm going to do is talk about a made-up problem. The objective of that made-up problem is to show that quantum computers can then do things faster than a classical computer. So we will take a toy problem, it is not really a kind of a computational problem which we study, but the toy problem will show us an advantage of quantum computer over the classical computer. And this problem is, or the algorithm is called Deutsch's algorithm. Why we are doing it? Because it is very simple. It does not require a lot of background. It shows that quantum computer is much more powerful than a classical complexity, classical computing. Another small thing is that it is framed in what we call a query framework. And this framework is important in many, many algorithms. So by talking about Deutsch's algorithm, you will be introduced even to this query framework. Okay, so that is my motivation of covering Deutsch's algorithm. It is simple, it shows the advantage for a quantum computer, and we get introduced to what we call this query framework, right? So let's look at this problem. Pay attention here. The problem is very simple. You have a function which takes either 0 or 1 and outputs 0 or 1. You don't know what it outputs. The only way to find out its answer is to talk to this black box. Sometimes we call it a black box, sometimes we call it an oracle. This black box hides the function. The only way to figure out what is f of 0 is you send 0 to this function and it will tell you what is f0. You send it 1, it will tell you f of 1. Okay, this is the only way to figure out the value of f. We want to find whether f0 is not equal to f1. The problem is that this black box is very expensive. Anytime you ask it a question, it charges you 100 rupees. The question is, in how many times should I talk to this black box? How many times should I talk to this black box is how many queries should I do to this black box? So if I do 1 query, I will be charged 100 rupees. If I do 2 queries, I will be charged 200 rupees, so on and so forth. So how many queries should I do so that I can figure out whether f0 is equal to f1 or not? Now, it should be very clear to you that you can just pay 200 rupees and figure out whether f0 is equal to f1 or not, right? What will you do? What will be your queries? What will you ask this black box? Go ahead. What
So, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm very new in this field. I want to know that is it a right way to analyze quantum circuits on FPGA boards? Can we analyze quantum circuits on FPGA boards?
I don't think that's possible at this point. I think the quantum hardwares are very, very specific. And generally, there are very, very few companies which are able to make such a hardware. And the only way to analyze it is, look at those systems and build programs on that. But if someone has done it on FPGA, I don't know. My knowledge is very limited in this regard.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. So coming back to this, I'm saying if you are ready to pay 200 rupees, then you can figure out whether f0 is not equal to f1. That means I'm allowed to ask this oracle 2 questions. What will I ask? It's very, very simple, right? What are the 2 questions which I will ask? Remember, I can ask oracle 0, it will give me f0. I can ask 1, it will give me f1. That's what this oracle does. If I want to find whether f0 is equal to f1 or not, what are the 2 questions which I should ask? What are the 2 queries I should ask this function, this black box?
What is F0 and what is F1?
Very good, right? These are the two questions and I can do it in 200 rupees. Now, are you also convinced that you can never find what is F0, whether F0 is equal to F1 or not using only 100 rupees? If I'm giving you 100 rupees, can you figure this question out? Because if I'm only given 100 rupees, I can either figure out F0 or F1. There is no way to figure out whether F0 is not equal to F1 or not. What I'm going to show you is that in the quantum framework, I can do this. I can do it just by doing one query. That's what we are going to see. Now for this, you want to understand query framework. Now remember, what was the black box? I gave X and I gave gave f of X. I ask X, it will give me f of X. My first point is that this is not a quantum operation. Can you tell me why? Why is this not a quantum operation? The answer
Only 0 and 1 we are using. We are not using any qubit.
No. Just let's start with 0 and 1. Even there you will find the answer. Why is this not a quantum operation? Again, the answer is in what we discussed in the first part. Remember, what was the property of quantum operation? They should be...
It's not reversible, I think.
It's not reversible, right? So suppose I had a function where f0 was also 0, f1 was also 0. Then obviously this gate is not reversible. Once I get the answer as 0, I don't know whether the input was 0 or input was 1. So cannot be a quantum operation because it is not reversible. So the trick is, as I told you, classically, there is a way by which you can make every quantum classical circuit a quantum circuit. And this is how you do it. You calculate the value of f in another bit. So now you have two bits. First bit is x, where you want to compute the answer. Second bit is b. You give x, the answer will be b XOR. Does everyone understand what this exclusive OR operation is? XOR, exclusive OR. Do I need to tell? Can someone tell me what is this operation?
Modulo to addition.
Modulo to addition. Brilliant, right? So if both the sides are different, then it is 1. If both the sides are same, then it is 0. But this is the truth table. Sorry. 1, 1 is 0, right? So now you see that if B is 0, then it basically tells me what is the second bit. So this is how you can get the answer you wanted. Okay, this is a classical circuit. This is how you encode a classical circuit reversibly. So there is no cheating here. I can even give this circuit to your classical algorithm and you can still not do just by one query. And it's very easy to convince. You can try it yourself. Using 100 rupees, you cannot figure out whether f0 is equal to f1 or not. Remember, we don't want to compute f. We don't want to figure out what is f0. That can be done by the oracle. Our task is to figure out whether f0 is equal to f1 or not. That's what we want to do. And changing this oracle makes it reversible, but does not change anything. Classically, you still need 2 queries. You still need to pay 200 rupees. But once we have this as a reversible circuit, we can tell what is its quantum circuit. So now, what will be the quantum circuit? Anytime I am given a state which is a superposition, so I can just apply this, right? So this will become x remains x, and b will remain f of 0. X remains x, and I will get negative of f of 0. If b is 1, then it flips f(x), right? So this is the action on a quantum oracle. So now I know what quantum oracle is. Remember, if I tell you what happens on the basis states, then you know what happens on any superposition. This is what we are using now, which we discussed in the first part. And the point is, this allows us to do many things. This will allow us, this quantum black box, we will query only once and we will find out what is, whether F0 is not equal to F1, whether F0 is equal to F1. We needed at least 2 queries in a classical case. Classically, quantumly, we will just use 1 query. And let's see how. Notice what this oracle does, right? Remember, this was your oracle. If I make b to be 0, then I'm just getting f of x. So now, if I fix x to be 0 and b to be 0, right? X is equal to 0, b is equal to 0. Noticing my output from this is what I will get. Are you convinced? X remains as x, 0 remains 0. Here, it will become b plus f of 0. B is 0, so it will become f of 0. Similarly, if I to this oracle, if I feed 1 and if I feed 0, then 1 remains 1. And here I get 0 XOR f of 1, which is f of 1. So are you convinced that this is the answer? If I feed 0, 0, then you get 0 F0. If I feed 1, 0, then I get f of 1 in the second bit. This is what we wanted from the oracle. This is what it is doing. The fun part is what happens if we do it in a superposition. If I give 1 by root 2 0 plus 1 as my first state, then in my output, I have both F0 as well as F1. Right? So notice what is my state? 1 by root 2 0 0 plus 1 by root 2 1 0. And I know that 0 0 goes to 0 F0 and 1 0 goes to 1 F1. This is just applying the same thing linearly. So to this oracle, this quantum oracle, which we had, if we give quantum state 1 by root 2 0 plus 1, then we get this state. Now you might be excited, oh, it has F0 and F1. But remember, this is not as simple. Even though I have this state, there is no way to figure out what is F0, what is F1. Actually, you can mathematically show, this is called Holevos theorem. This is going too deep into quantum information. But from this state, you cannot obtain both F0 as well as F1. This is known, this is proven. You can only get F0 or only get F1. But this is the state. Now, as I said, superposition is only half the story. We need interference to kind of get something important. And we will see how we will use now interference to actually figure out whether F0 is equal to F1 or not. So this is our state. You can even use your, you can take a pen and paper and see that this is your final state, right? You have 1 by root 2, 0 F0, 1 F1. And this is, I said this is not cheating, because even though your state might be 1 by root 2, 0 F0 plus 1 F1, you can only figure out F0 or you can only figure out F1. You cannot figure out both. This is superposition. But we can figure out if F0 is equal to F1 or not. So we cannot figure out both, but we can figure out a combined property. And that is basically Deutsch's algorithm. We are given this oracle, and we noticed that if we put 1 by root 2 0 plus 1, and here 0, we get 1 by root 2 0 F0 plus 1 by root 2 1 F1. We get this state, and now using some kind of more manipulation, we will be able to answer this question. And let's see how. This actually requires two techniques. Remember what we want to do? We want to figure out whether F0 is equal to F1 in one query. It will use two quantum tricks, querying in superposition and phase trick. Good thing is querying in superposition you have already seen. Right? What happens if I give 1 by root 2 0 plus 1 in the first qubit? I get 0 f0 plus 1 f1. That we have seen. Now let me tell you what phase trick is. If in the second bit now, if I give minus state, then my function is actually computed in the phase as a power of -1 instead of here. And again, this I give it as an exercise. You can take all possible combinations and see that this happens. Just by keeping your state as minus as the second one, your function is calculated in the phase. So now I will combine the two tricks, and this will be my output. I'm skipping some states, but you can confirm that this is what happens. Okay, you can easily, now you know how to apply a gate on a combination, on a superposition of states. So if I tell you that my first state is plus, second state is minus, you can do the exercise and see that this is the final output. I don't have to, do the calculation myself. We had done this calculation multiple times in the first half, and you will see that this is the state we get. So now, this is something which you notice. Remember, this is the state of the first qubit. -1 to the power f0. Again, sorry, because of time constraint, I am not showing you how from left side, right side is obtained, but that is a simple calculation which you can do. So now trust me that your first qubit is going to be in this state. -1 to the power f0, 0 plus -1 to the power f1, 1. That means if f0 was equal to f1, then you are in the plus state. If f0 is not equal to f1, then you are in the minus state. Remember, you wanted to distinguish between these two cases. Is f0 equal to f1 or if f0 is not equal to f1? Now, using both phase trick as well as superposition trick, using this circuit, we notice that our first qubit is in either plus state or minus state. And then my claim is that we are done. Can you tell me how? So if my claim is that my final state is either in plus or in minus. It is in plus if f0 is equal to f1. It is in minus state if f0 is not equal to f1. And my claim is now I can figure out which one is the case. Is f0 equal to f1 or if f0 is not equal to f1? How do I do it? What is your guess? The answer is written below with some blanks. Okay, what does the Hadamard operation do? Do you remember? Zero state goes to?
Plus.
Sorry?
Plus, sir.
And 1 goes to?
Minus.
Great. Right? So, if I had 0 or 1 state, I would be happy. Now I have plus and minus state. So, how do I convert them into 0 or 1? What operation should I apply?
C0.
No. C0 is applied on 2 qubits. I have only 1 qubit, which is either in plus or minus state. And see what is the action of Hadamard. It converts 0 to plus and 1 to minus. And for any quantum gate, we have its inverse also, right? So what will inverse of Hadamard do? It will convert plus state into what will H inverse do? It will convert plus into 0 and minus into 1. And now you can measure. If you measure 0, that means F0 is equal to F1. If you measure 1, then F0 is not equal to F1. It turns out inverse of Hadamard is Hadamard itself. So you have that gate. You can apply just Hadamard in the end, and if you measure, if you get 0, that means F0 was equal to F1. If you get 1, that means F0 is not equal to. So let me tell you the complete circuit of this Deutsch algorithm. How did we figure out whether F0 was equal to F1 or not? Remember, we just had one query, and the idea was that in the first qubit we will feed plus state. In the second qubit, we will feed minus state. The first part here is just to convert the first qubit into plus state and second qubit into minus state. This is trivial. Not trivial. What I mean to say is that this is not very important. This was just so that I get plus state as the first qubit, minus as the second qubit. Then I apply Oracle and I get this state. This is as an exercise. You can convince yourself that this is what Oracle will do. Then if I apply Hadamard and measure, I will figure out if F0 is equal to F1 or not. After measurement, if I get 0, that means F0 is equal to F1. If I get 1, that means F0 is not equal to F1. That is how I will decide. So I understand that this circuit might seem slightly daunting, and why did we apply plus state? Why did we apply minus state? This seems slightly magical. So let me tell you how one interpretation by which we can understand how this algorithm must have been discovered. Deutsch was actually a physicist. He thought of these things as waves, and there is a nice way to understand this algorithm, right? So let me give you the physics interpretation. This wave is showing the amplitude on 0, right? So this wave, think of it as an amplitude on 0. And now, when you apply Hadamard on 0, what state do you get? This is something you already know. Plus state, right? So that means your amplitude is split into two parts. So that's why I have written it as two different waves. Now, what the Oracle does is create a phase according to the function value. If F0 was not equal to F1, then the phase by the Oracle will be different, and then you see that these two waves are out of phase. Where there is a high thing in the first wave, there is a low thing in the second wave, so on and so forth. So Oracle creates a phase difference according to the function value. If the function value were different, there is a phase difference. If you look below, since the function values were the same, the phase difference will remain the 0. There will be no phase difference between the two waves. So Oracle applies a phase according to the function value. And now again, I will ask you to remember your physics lesson. If two waves are out of phase, and if I interfere them, there is a constructive interference or destructive interference?
Destructive only.
Destructive interference, right? So now your phase on 0, your amplitude on 0 will become 0. That means you will get 1 as the answer. This happens when F0 is not equal to F1. If these waves were in phase, there will be a what kind of interference? Constructive interference, and all amplitude will come on state 0. So now Deutsch must have had this intuition, and using that he could build this circuit. So he wanted function to be computed in phase, that's why he used minus state, and he wanted to split and compute both the function values, that's why he used the first header. Okay, so with this, I come to the last slide. What have we seen? We have seen how to build a quantum algorithm. What are the quantum states? What is the input? What can we apply on this data? What are the gates we can apply? How do we find the final answer? And then what if I have multiple qubits? This was the first part of the talk. And this allows us to build quantum circuits or quantum algorithms. And we saw a toy problem where quantum algorithms were much more powerful. This was the Deutsch's algorithm. This finishes my talk, and I would be happy to take your questions now.
Yeah, any queries from the participant? I hope it was so interactive, and the participants were also participating in the if any further queries are there. Yeah, so there in the chat box, you had shown circuit how to simulate algorithm for the same problem.
For Deutsch's problem, yes. Let me. See how to simulate algorithm, right? So if you want to do some hands-on, again, you can go to Qiskit and you can create this Deutsch's algorithm there, and you can create an oracle where f0 value is something, f1 value is something, and when you run the classical simulation, it will show you the final result. Is that the question which you are asking, or you are asking how would physically it will be done on a quantum computer?
So actually, as this is the next part of FDP in the same topic, this simulation in Qiskit part has already been covered in the previous FDP. So I'd like to request the participants, please visit our YouTube channel where all the sessions have been recorded and uploaded. I'll be sharing the link to the participant. You can go through, there are 2 to 3 sessions, how to work on Qiskit simulator and how to find the results based on the input. So that is all from the input from my side in this regard.
Thank you. All quantum states are reversible. See, the states are not reversible. What you want to say is, are gates reversible? Is that your question?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes.
Gates.
Yes. So we notice that quantum gates have to be reversible. Now you are asking why not all reversible gates are quantum. So this is something which comes from postulates of quantum mechanics. Like all these physicists sat down and they decided that this is how the universe works. And what they wanted was that their quantum state was a vector. Now, if you only say that your gates are reversible, then your quantum state can go to something which is not a quantum state, which is weird, right? So you had some electron which was having some quantum state. When you apply the operation, you want to make sure that you again get a quantum state. It should not become something non-quantum, right?
Okay, sir. Okay.
And
Thank you.
that's why it has to be unitary and not just reversible.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Oh, Qiskit is an open source. You will have to check on the website. It is free.
Yeah. Yes, it is open source.
It is open source. Okay, great.
Yes.
Sir, can you tell me some research direction about the quantum computation? Currently, that means what the research opportunities are there in this particular field?
I think the interaction is very limited, Mosum. I think you should first read more basics about quantum computation. There are many fields. Broadly, there are people from physics, there are people from electrical engineering, there are people from computer science working on this. Obviously, there are a lot of research questions about how you can build a quantum computer. That's something which physics and electrical engineering people do. There are people in physics who try to understand quantum information, what kind of information theory things you can do. As a computer scientist, mostly our job is to figure out what kind of problems can be solved on a quantum computer faster than a classical computer. So what are the problems where quantum computers give you an advantage? What are the problems where quantum computers does not give you an advantage? There are many problems, interesting problems where we already know the advantage. There are many problems even in machine learning where people are learning whether there can be an advantage or not.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Optimization, there are problems in simulation. So broadly, figuring out problems where quantum can give you an advantage. Then there is quantum error correction. Then there is quantum cryptography, where if factoring comes out, then what do you do? How do you secure your communication? There are many questions like that. But I would urge you to read much more, like probably this Nielsen Chuang book. Once your basics are there, then you can think of where to go for the research.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, there is a lot of research on quantum computing for fault tolerance and error correction. I'm not the right person for that, but yes, once you start reading these books, you will see that there are already people have made error correcting codes. There are fault tolerant circuits which they are trying to design. It's actually very important for quantum computers because the states are very fragile and not stable. So these questions are much more important now since we have these noisy intermediate scaled computers which are very unstable. So these questions are important, but I don't work on them. So
sir, actually we have a specific session for this quantum computing error correction on Thursday. So I'd like to request Dr. Jagbir Singh, please do attend the session. That is Thursday afternoon session.
Great.
Okay. So queries, I'd like to take this privilege to thank you, sir. It was more interactive and it was more interesting also to the specific point and more elaborative in nature. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you for this wonderful session. We'll look forward to hear from you in near future also.
Thank you. I was very happy. Thanks for asking all the questions. I hope it was helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Bye.
Okay.